Hello there, I stream twice a week on Twitch, so if you like what you see in this video, please head over to twitch.tv/SoFreely, and I'd love to see you in chat. We have a nice little community going there, and we sometimes talk about politics and current events, but mostly we just play games and hang out, so hope to see you there. Okay, bye, enjoy the video.
Dignity and privacy in particular are two things that becoming homeless makes nearly impossible to have. So preying on that lack for content seems particularly insidious to me.
Yeah, I guess we're just gonna, start. We're just gonna try our best.
Let's talk about okay, let's try that again. Let's talk about Mr. Beast. It's video. My bad. Let's talk about Mr. Beast's video, because you can put your pitchforks away. I'm not here to rip into Mr. Beast. I'm only here to rip into his videos. That's also not true. I'm here to start a discussion. One with the nuance I believe it requires to address the topic in question faithfully. Because here's the thing. I'm going to be criticizing charity, and it's hard to critique charity without sounding selfish or, wow, uncharitable. So let's get one thing straight right off the bat. Providing resources to those in need and volunteering for organizations that provide resources and services to those same people is unequivocally a good thing. Okay? However, what I'm going to be talking about today is not about doing good things for people. I'm going to be talking about the private and voluntary sectors and how they are misbelieved to be the only real alternatives in a system that currently underprovides for its citizens to the extent that it can be nearly impossible to access daily necessities to exist, like food or water, shelter, and employment if one is living below the breadline. I want to talk about how in a world where people find it easier to imagine the end of the world, shut the f*** up. A world where people find it easier to imagine the end of the world rather than the end of capitalism, people lack the creativity to see an alternative to the capitalist machine. And that makes sense. People are born and die in capitalism, and it's hard to imagine a way out. But that doesn't have to be the case. I don't have a problem with this Mr. Beast video existing, per se. And when I talk about this Mr. Beast video, I wrote this script about the curing blindness video, and that happened a long time ago. Okay, there's been a bunch of videos since then, but we're trying this whole YouTube thing, so we're trying our best. So instead of referring to specifically the blindness video, I guess I'm referring to a lot of Mr. Beast's charity videos in general. So I don't have a problem with them existing per se. I'm not here to petition that YouTube should remove it or that people shouldn't go and enjoy it now that it's out in the world. However, the socio-political and economic conditions that led these videos being able to be made is another matter entirely. I believe that it is unethical that videos like this should be able to earn monetary and uncritical success on the internet, because the conditions that created these videos are quite frankly tragic. What do I mean by the circumstances enabling these videos to be made? Well, a few things. The fact that charity can be farmed for money-making content is pretty dystopian to me, and I know this isn't a new idea. I've seen a bunch of other people talking about it, but that content creators have the ability to design, put resources into, and highly produce a video that directly profits from the misfortune of others, regardless of the charity being achieved in it, is kind of dystopian to me. To find people who are experiencing an injustice, film them being given an opportunity to get relief from that injustice, and their reaction to that charity is a little bit gross to me. I'll be honest. I know that in the comments, I'll be contending with people upset that I just don't want people to have nice things. And that's not at all my problem, precisely the opposite. I want everyone to have nice things. In fact, my problem is that people shouldn't have to wait for philanthropic billionaires to take pity on them in order to have nice things. And that it is a problem of our governments and our systems. People should systematically have access to the things that they need to live. Because remember, none of us choose to be born, but we do choose our elected officials whose main job is to keep us safe, or at least it should be. That's why we put them there. That's why we give them the power in the first place, is so that they stop us from dying sometimes. Right now, I'm lucky enough to live in a country that does provide universal healthcare, although the Tories are trying desperately to undermine and privatize the NHS at every turn. So why do I give a shit now that I live in a country with universal healthcare? A few reasons. With the United States playing such a pivotal role in global trends, economically and politically, it's a dangerous precedent that the United States inadvertently sets, that they have no access to universal healthcare, despite being a massive global power with the world's largest economy by GDP. It motivates other global powers to privatize healthcare when the profits being made over the pond in the insurance and pharmaceutical industries are so obvious to see, as evidenced by the Conservative Party's constant efforts in the UK to sabotage the NHS, frustrating the people with inefficiency so much that they begin to see privatization as the only real alternative. Second, I want people everywhere to be able to live fulfilling, happy lives without fear of becoming destitute due to accident, illness, or lack of employment. To see YouTube content being made from the idea that some people cannot afford to regain their own eyesight is not a source of joy. For me, it's depressing. Because nobody should have their ability to live a life without obstacles hindered by the amount of money that they earn or that they have, especially maybe in the case of generational wealth. For as long as people see the wealthy as a way out of poverty, we are doomed as a society to let the conditions enabling immense wealth to continue uncriticized. So let's talk about content creation, wealth, charity, and how a world in which everyone has access to basic needs is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Part 1. Do it for the Vine. Am I still in focus? Yes. Okay, so this time we're wearing headphones. The idea of doing things for the sake of content that can be monetized is not a new one. It's been gaining traction ever since the advent of the internet and exacerbated by the rise of the content creating profession. The phrase, "do it for the Vine," for those of you who may not remember, oh my god, is a phrase that originated on YouTube in reference to the 7-second video sharing app Vine, rest in peace, that encouraged users to do dares or often other irresponsible acts on camera in order to increase the chances of virality later when uploaded to the internet. It started with a certain level of irony at first, but with all things internet, the irony quickly wore off, and we began seeing people perform riskier, more socially irresponsible behavior in order to gain traction online. Historic cases of this include Logan Paul's infamous Suicide Forest video, various challenge videos such as the Tide Pod and ice cream licking videos, and controversial channels like Micah Stoffer and Family of 5, putting children in embarrassing and often dangerous situations, to name a few. But if you're on this corner of the internet with video essays and commentary channels, then I imagine none of this is new information to you. So you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with Mr. Beast doing nice things on camera for random folks? Well, whilst I believe that the idea of do it for the Vine originally started a trend of behaving badly on camera for views, we also see its opposite work fairly effectively as well. Joyful content, acts of charity, and content that is intended to spread positive vibes rather than shock value. Also has a history of gaining virality, views, and ad revenue without the pesky negative feedback. A useful and paradoxical example comes in the form of Logan Paul's Seeing Color for the First Time video, in which Logan Paul gets and wears for the first time a pair of totally real glasses that allegedly cures his totally real colorblindness. A video that even I remember seeing at the time and thinking it was kind of nice, regardless of whether or not it was real. Logan Paul in particular has a peculiar talent for using the pendulum of cancellation swing in his favor, depending on whatever bullshit scheme he's next planning to release, but I'll move on. The previous consensus regarding MrBeast's charitable videos seemed to be that if he makes a profit doing what he does, but continues to use that profit to help people, then ultimately there is a net good. MrBeast himself has said that he uses most of the money earned from his charity videos to put towards the next one, creating an endless stream of like projects. The important thing to remember here is that MrBeast is a YouTube channel and is a business, not a non-profit organization. It makes a profit, otherwise it wouldn't be successful. The particular model that it runs on is profitable, and thus it is also able to continue indefinitely. I feel well within my rights to judge what it achieves as a business and the resources and people it may or may not exploit along the way. But this video is not intended to be a critique of MrBeast as a creator. You could see plenty of other YouTube videos about that. See Tiffany Ferg's video, it's incredible, on the topic of MrBeast specifically. Instead, this section is a critique of the clout-chasing charity climate that videos like MrBeast's contribute towards and normalize. Zachary Dereniowski is a TikTok creator who routinely approaches strangers and engages them in what gave rise to the hashtag honesty test. I hate that. Dereniowski, along with many other creators that hopped onto the trend, would test the honesty of strangers, often actual homeless people, by pretending to be in need. If the strangers, again, often actual homeless people, were willing to help the TikToker out with some spare cash or other such generosity, the stranger would be rewarded with a cash prize. Lots of people found these clips emotionally moving, which is in small part understandable, as many people find out for the first time that the poor are actually statistically far more generous than the wealthy. Dereniowski, or Mr. Demotivator on TikTok, has amassed 13.4 million followers and over 550 million likes, making this type of feel-good charity content on his page. Dereniowski isn't the only one. YouTuber Dots video giving a homeless man $20,000 has, as of this recording, over 1.7 million views, featuring a pretty sickly thumbnail. The video documents Dots inviting Tom, a homeless man, to a game of hopscotch before surprising him with $500 for, quote, playing hopscotch and being a kid again, unquote. He is then treated to a plethora of other treats, including a stay at the Hilton Hotel, a new phone, and meals. The video ends with Tom showing endless gratitude for Dots' kindness. As a side note, I find this pretty funny, given that the gratefulness shown towards Dots in this video can be directly attributed to his viewers for providing him a platform and the money with which to do so. A fact Dots acknowledges in the very description of the video, yet the clout is for Dots to collect. The masses footing the bill for the praise and celebration of the wealthy's charity is a recurring theme in this video, and you'll soon see why. Some creators even feature themselves posing as homeless people or other such disenfranchised people, pretending to ask regular citizens for money and rewarding those who choose to do so on camera. This kind of content is manipulative. It's clout chasing and arguably does more harm than good. If the man in Dereniowski's video had not said yes to playing a game of hopscotch, would he have been deemed as undeserving of this $500 reward? What about if the homeless man had refused to be filmed? Would he not have received the money, unless agreeing to be a prop in Dereniowski's video? While there is some evidence to suggest that content like this can promote generosity in order to boost one's own reputation, videos like these also promote the idea that there are deserving and undeserving poor. The idea of deserving and undeserving poor is a concept that justifies support for those that were poor due to circumstances deemed outside of their control, such as the old, the sick, or the differently abled, and stigmatized support for those that were perceived as being unwilling to work. The lazy, the depressed, the mentally ill. This concept allowed conservative leaders to pit the working classes against one another whilst creating legislation that actively disadvantaged all of them and advantaged the upper class that no longer needed accountability for their wealth. They simply deserved it. This helps to push the narrative that society is based on a meritocracy, the idea that advancement is based on effort and achievement rather than class. From looking at a person, we have no idea what kind of events happened in their lives to lead up to their current circumstances. This means that conservative policies have made it extremely difficult to access welfare and social services through endless and difficult paperwork, resulting in some people giving up altogether on trying to access the help that they need and are entitled to. This content is also dehumanizing and requires people to be agreed to be filmed in what could potentially be their lowest point in life in order to be awarded with that which they need to survive. The impoverished people that feature in these videos are benefiting from once-off charity at the cost of their dignity, a privilege that they inevitably have a hard time prioritizing over their literal survival. Dignity and privacy in particular are two things that becoming homeless makes nearly impossible to have. So preying on that lack for content seems particularly insidious to me. In this way, the people featured in these videos don't really have a choice about whether or not their face and living conditions are shown to millions of people when the power imbalance between a successful YouTuber and the disenfranchised person is so great. Returning to MrBeast's blindness video, if 100 out of the 1,000 people he vowed to cure of blindness had refused to show their faces on camera, would he have only cured 900 people? Or alternatively, would he have found a different 100 people more deserving of the cure for their willingness to appear on his YouTube channel? Additionally, whilst they might encourage charity on an individualistic level, this contributes to the perpetuated and broken idea that charity is a solution to poverty instead of structural, political, and systemic change. Whilst creators have consequentially bettered the lives of the individuals who featured in their videos, the long-term impact of the image these videos bolster can have lasting damage on the way people perceive the poor and the solutions available to helping alleviate poverty. According to an excellent Wired article on the topic, quote, a YouTuber giving a homeless person a large sum of money, for example, does not work to alleviate the systemic causes of homelessness, such as unaffordable housing, stagnant wages, domestic violence, racial disparities, poor treatment of veterans, ableism, and lack of affordable childcare. Even if we were to give each homeless person a large sum of money, this does nothing to tackle the problem of homelessness at its root, revealing YouTubers' actions as merely performative Band-Aid solutions. In this instance, content creators would have a bigger and more long-lasting effect if they instead volunteered at mutual aid foundations, donated to homeless crisis response teams or harm reduction programs, funded job training programs for homeless individuals, or made charitable donations to local homeless coalitions in their area. Or, even bigger picture, advocated for politicians, organizations, or systemic changes that have a direct impact on policy changes affecting the country as a whole. These are all ideas, by the way, that the National Coalition for the Homeless suggests in order to help improve the lives of the homeless. Their philosophy can be summarized by the CARE or CARE acronym, standing for contribution, advocacy, reaching out, and education, of which giving money to individual homeless people makes up only a small part of suggested ways to improve the lives of the homeless. However, these kind of actions don't have the same kind of visual and emotional impact as one wherein an individual gives another individual a large sum of money that has an immediate visual effect on their circumstances. You can't make a thumbnail out of advocating for policy change. I can't make much out of electing a government official. Get your homeless coalition donation mugs right here, folks. Is where it at. Yep. Additionally, there is also a fear of expressing political views on YouTube for fear of alienating your audience and becoming demonetizable. So advocating for the political interests of the disenfranchised doesn't make an appearance in the videos themselves. This is acutely obvious in the way that MrBeast hand-wringed about the lack of affordable healthcare in his own country only after the fact, after publishing the blindness video on Twitter, where a majority of the viewers of his videos will never see it. This hypocrisy isn't uncommon, and charity creators will often emphasize the tragedy of the circumstances enabling their videos, whilst doing nothing to emphasize the proven strategies and solutions that improve the lives of the people they are making content about. But who cares, right? If a person's life was immediately improved by being in a YouTube video, who are we to say that those opportunities shouldn't happen? Part 2. Philanthropy is not without selfishness. Logan Paul is also a good example of how philanthropy benefits the wealthy, perhaps in more ways than it benefits the philanthroped, the philanthropized, the people benefiting from the philanthropy. There are social and economic benefits to incentivize charity from the extremely wealthy, namely positive PR, tax benefits, and unquestioned wealth. After the onslaught of bad PR from his Suicide Forest video, in which he uploaded a video documenting a dead body he discovered in the Aokigahara forest in Japan, and after a flubbed attempt at an apology video after the fact, Logan Paul took the charm offensive path. A charm offensive is a strategic use of obliging or cooperative behavior in order to earn public favor. He proceeded to make a video about suicide prevention and make a large donation to a suicide prevention charity. Whilst this didn't exactly serve to reverse his bad reputation into a good one, it did reset the scales in a way. And he went on to have his antics tolerated by the internet at large once again, only to later get into a similar balancing act again with further scandals. We were willing to at least excuse him because, yeah, okay, that was a pretty nice thing to do. Someone who more successfully utilized a charm offensive to tip the scales in his favor is Bill Gates. Before becoming well known for his philanthropic healthcare endeavors, Bill Gates actually had a pretty bad mainstream reputation during his time at Microsoft. Microsoft has historically employed some unsavory, predatory hardball tactics in what's now known as the browser wars, which involved using monopoly power to crush internet browser upstarts during the 90s. Microsoft was hit with a lawsuit, and during the ensuing trial, highly unflattering video footage of Bill Gates' testimony, which is still available online today, by the way, portrays Gates as condescending and frequently evasive of investigative questions. According to Businessweek, at the time of the trial, quote, he argues with prosecutors over the definition of commonly used words, including we and compete. Early rounds of his deposition show him offering obfuscatory answers and saying, I don't recall, so many times that even the presiding judge had to chuckle. Worse, many of the technology chief's denials and pleas of ignorance have been directly refuted by prosecutors with snippets of email Gates both sent and received.
That is, what you need in order to understand the question is to have me define what is meant by definition, at least loosely.
And so, how did Gates turn his image around after this damning description? Simple. Charity. During the 18 months between the start of the trial and the verdict, Bill Gates donated $20.3 billion to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in what was called a charm offensive. The timing of these donations was effective in rebranding Gates from a ruthless, monopolistic businessman into a charitable, reluctant billionaire. Gates' positive reputation lasts to this day, crafting an image of a man who is concerned for the state of international healthcare, whilst actively hindering global access to COVID-19 vaccine by lobbying for intellectual property interests, even during a worldwide health crisis. Love that. That's great. I love that for us. We see this pattern across the wealthy. Have you ever heard of the name Sackler before? The Sacklers are infamous for founding Purdue Pharma and Mundipharma, and by doing so, allegedly creating and propagating the opioid crisis in the US by obfuscating research regarding the drug OxyContin's addictiveness prior to its release and widespread popularity, have whitewashed their family name with enormous donations to art and education facilities. Their name plaques hang in, but are not limited to, the Sackler Institute for
Comparative Genomics at the American Museum of Natural History, the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery at the Smithsonian Institution, the Sackler Center for Arts Education at the Guggenheim, and the Sackler Wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, among other places that aren't even limited to the US. This means that if you, unsurprisingly, had never come across the name Sackler before finding it in a museum, you may never become aware of the lawsuits mounted against them, and may instead know them as generous patrons of the arts, effectively cementing their name in your mind as, Sackler good. Sackler good. For more reading on this, I highly recommend Empire of Pain by Patrick Keefe. It's a big boy book. But it's actually really well written, and it comes across more as like a thriller than a boring nonfiction about an awful family. Imagine Succession, but in the pharmaceutical industry. Even Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard, who earned kudos from almost every corner of the world, was hailed as a hero after donating his company to environmental organizations. However, this is also revealed to be a very clever PR campaign, and the majority of voting shares in the company remain in the hands of Chouinard's offspring. This seems particularly relevant given the current climate surrounding Nepo babies. For an excellent video on this topic, see Adam Conover's Why There's No Such Thing as a Good Billionaire. An awfully relevant title, if I do say so myself. It's also important to keep in mind that the rich aren't entirely giving away their own money when making large donations. Because of the way tax regulations work in both the UK and the US, the higher your income bracket usually means the more the government and therefore the taxpayer will subsidize your donation to charity. According to The Guardian, gifts to registered charities are tax-free. So a gift of £100 would cost the standard taxpayer only £80, with £20 being paid by the government. But the highest rate taxpayer would need to pay out only £55, because the state would provide the other £45. Super rich philanthropists, therefore, find themselves in a position where a large percentage of their gift is funded by the taxpayer. These donations also cost the government valuable tax revenue. In 2012, the total cost to the state of the various tax benefits offered to donors was estimated by the Treasury at £3.64 billion. As for what kind of organizations constitute as charities, the waters, they get real muddy, my friend. Where in the UK, the 4 categories of charity include relief of poverty, advancement of education, promotion of religion, and other purposes beneficial to the community. The US tax code is similar, stating including the following under the charity categorization: organizations that are organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, testing for public safety, literary, educational, or other specified purposes. Specifically in the cases of other purposes beneficial to the community and other specified purposes, you can imagine how such a vague definition could be used by the wealthy to donate to causes that personally benefit them. The Koch brothers in the US being a particularly nefarious example of this, donating millions of tax-exempt dollars to think tanks and advocacy groups that advance their own economic and political agendas. Namely, the Koch brothers have financially supported Americans for Prosperity, a conservative group with interests in promoting conservative healthcare causes and in fighting climate crisis policy, as well as the Cato Institute. Side note, the Cato Institute is a powerful libertarian think tank dedicated to lowering and/or abolishing taxes, the privatization of government agencies and welfare programs, and the deregulation of markets, to the extent that one of the founders, Murray Rothbard, believed that parents should be able to sell their children to create a flourishing free market in children. But don't worry, he did admit that whilst this idea sounds superficially monstrous, it would eventually be beneficial to everyone. You know, except maybe, I don't know, the slave children. The Koch brothers are far from a unique example, and dozens of billionaires are known to contribute funds to organizations that directly or indirectly advance their agendas, and obviously even to specific politicians and political parties. This leads to an overwhelming imbalance of power in the hands of the plutocracy, ruled by the rich rather than those of the democracy,
rule by the people. All of this is to say that the more the wealthy are able to change the perception surrounding themselves and their wealth, the more they entrench their ability to build and hold on to that wealth. Charity improves public perception of the wealthy and makes us less inclined to believe that they shouldn't have that wealth in the first place. And so they can continue to sit on their hoards of treasure completely unchallenged. Perhaps if Smaug had simply occasionally donated his riches to the land he terrorized, a scrappy band of adventurers may not have been so interested in killing him. Part 3. Charity as a replacement for social services. One could argue that despite donations being used to further their own motives and image, aren't good things still being achieved by money going to the right places? Find yourself in agreement with the top wealthy 1% on policy and priorities as to what the right places means, then perhaps. However, studies show that you probably don't, and that the wealthiest portion of global populations rarely have the same socio-political interests as the poorest and working classes. Specifically, a study entitled Democracy and the Policy Preferences of Wealthy Americans surveyed the socio-political priorities of the top 1% of wealth holders and compared them to the majority of the population. The study finds on multiple occasions that whilst the wealthy have the major share of influence on political, economic, and social conditions, they share interests with the common people a minority of the time. If you were to look at this list of issues and tell me what you believe to be the most important issues facing the United States, or your own country for that matter, which ones would you choose? Choose now! Dun 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. It's just the most dystopian game of fucking what's that game? Fucking, what is it called? What is it called?
Jeopardy. The game is called Jeopardy.
If you answered budget deficits as very important and climate change as not very important at all, and perhaps you and the likes of Daddy Bezos may not be as different as you think. As we can see here, 87% of the wealthy respondents saw budget deficits, which includes government overspending, as being a very important problem facing the United States. This compares to only 7% of the general public rating budget deficits as a very important concern. We can also observe that climate change is an extremely underrepresented concern by the wealthy, with only 16% of wealthy respondents saying it was a very important issue. Of course, only 16% of the wealthy respondents believe that climate change is a very important issue when they can afford to build their very own state-of-the-art fucking Vault 101 mansion climate bunker. Inflation, if you haven't heard of it, is that thing that's ruining all of our lives, is second to lowest at 26%. We can fill in the blanks as to why these issues are not prioritized by the wealthy. Spoiler alert, they have money, so they don't have to worry about money. But the major takeaway here is that we can understand what causes the wealthy care about and are therefore likely to put their own money towards, and we can also understand how dramatically those priorities differ from our own. In addition to a difference in priorities as to the leading problems facing the United States, wealthy respondents also had differing opinions to the general public as to what can be done to address issues relating to employment, income, and healthcare. Regarding job and income programs, the differences between wealthy respondents to the study and working class people were stark. 43% of wealthy respondents agreed that government must make sure that nobody is without food, clothing, or shelter, compared to 68% of the general public. But only 23% agreed with the idea of providing a decent standard of living for the unemployed, compared to 50% of the general public. Only 19% of the wealthy respondents were in favor of the government ensuring that those who are willing to work are provided with a private job. This was compared to an overwhelming 68% of the general public. Further, only 8% of wealthy respondents agreed that the federal government should provide public employment to those willing and able to work, compared to 53% of the general public. So whilst some of the wealthy believe that people should have the basic necessities to survive, they aren't willing to personally invest in a government that would enable this to happen. When it comes to healthcare, we see a similar trend in the results. 61% of the general public are in favor of national health insurance, which would be funded by the taxpayer, compared to just 32% of wealthy respondents. Further, 59% of the general public are willing to pay higher taxes in order to secure health coverage for everyone. In comparison, only 41% of the wealthy are willing to do so. That was a lot of numbers to say the rich are not your friends. They are not your allies. Whilst some of these percentage differences may not appear stark, it's important to remember the disproportionate amount of power the wealthy have to create real change. So whilst they may appear closer in agreement on some issues than others, it really matters which group of people have the most sway in determining outcomes of their opinions. If you're one of the people who support the interests of the rich in the hopes of someday joining that demographic, it's important to remember that we have statistical evidence to show that they do not and will not do the same for you. They don't support you with their donations, and they don't support the solutions to your problems, so why would you stick up for them? I.M. Rubinov was a prominent writer on the subject of social insurance in the 1900s. One of his major contributions to progressive economics was the theory of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, affecting wage workers in the modern industrial world. These include accident, illness, old age, and loss of a job. These same four horsemen are what public systems and social insurances are designed to combat, using policies such as Social Security, socialized healthcare, Medicaid, and food assistance. Progressives look to the state to provide these safety nets to society because both employers and employees can benefit from a universal social insurance. Employers can relax knowing that they have a fairly sustainable, healthy, happy workforce, and employees can live comfortable lives whilst performing a job that needs doing without the risk of injury or accident impacting their ability to earn an income. It's a win-win. Employers get to protect their labor force that generates income for their businesses, and employees get to be protected. Rubinov argued that workers should assert their right to coverage from the state on the basis that workers must learn to see they have a right to force at least part of the cost and waste of sickness back upon the industry and society at large. And they can do it only when they demand that the state use its power and authority to help them, indirectly at least, with as much vigor as it has come to the assistance of the business interests. So for a moment, let's forget billionaires. Why can't charities make up for the shortcomings of government spending? A great explanation as to why the voluntary sector will never be able to cover the financial gaps caused by a lack of government spending to alleviate poverty can be found in the writings of Lester Salomon and his voluntary failures theory. Salomon offers insight into why the voluntary sector neither wants to nor is able to support an entire nation's people through philanthropic endeavors alone. The failures that he elaborates on are philanthropic insufficiency, philanthropic particularism, and philanthropic paternalism. Don't worry, I didn't understand them at first either, which is why I did the research, so you don't have to. Video essay, yay! Philanthropic insufficiency refers to how the voluntary sector cannot efficiently create enough resources to provide social insurance at a national scale. This was evidenced by the Great Depression in the 1930s. The solutions that did and didn't work to alleviate the economic freefall caused by the Great Depression is a great case study as to understanding the inefficiency of the voluntary sector and the power of social insurance. The need for income support rose dramatically during the Great Depression, which was compounded by the fact that this period of history saw extremely high unemployment rates. The Hoover administration's initial response to the Great Depression resolved to leave it up to the private and voluntary sectors to expand social benefits to wider society, as it was seen as more democratic than any government action. This was to create the President's Organization for Unemployment Relief. This boiled down to coordinating local welfare agencies and charity organizations to support people and provide people with jobs without spending government money. This meant that the pressure was on local support organizations, such as churches, building and loan associations, fraternal insurance policies, bank accounts, and credit arrangements that began reducing their services due to high demand they didn't have the resources to fulfill. After successfully providing more than 100,000 jobs between 1931 and 1932, the program had to come to an end due to the government not being willing to aid the agencies with money. And therefore, those agencies became too overwhelmed by the scale of the responsibilities thrust upon them. In contrast, the New Deal not only provided direct subsidies to those out of a job in the form of unemployment insurance, but also introduced a massive jobs program with a goal primarily orientated towards useful infrastructure projects. The Works Progress Administration was in operation from 1935 to 1943, and during that time managed to employ 3.3 million people at its peak in November of 1938, and over 8.5 million people in total. The voluntary sector is also affected by geographic coverage, where charity will naturally exist in some places more abundantly than others. This is especially the case for poorer communities, where voluntary organizations are fewer in number and often lack the appropriate resources to provide the communities they exist in, compared to wealthier communities that have more robust and varied non-profit organizations. In this way, municipal and federal governing bodies have more resources, data, and logistical ability to distribute baseline coverage for the entire country, as opposed to relying on non-profit organizations that differ in distribution, resources, and power. The needs of a nation are simply too great to be provided for by one charity organization, or one charitable billionaire, or one philanthropic church. However, if all of these entities were made instead to pay taxes on their wealth, and yes, I said wealth, which includes all of the supposedly non-existent money billionaires have in stocks and investments, to the government in combination with the taxes already paid by millions of salary earners across the country, there would be more than enough to go around. In the UK, campaigners for wealth taxes say that introducing a wealth tax could generate an additional £37 billion. This would be enough to cover even the rise in social care spending that occurred during the pandemic, from £24.8 billion in 2019 to 2020 to £26 billion in 2020 to 2021. The UK Wealth Tax Commission recommended even doing a once-off wealth tax of 1% on households with more than £1 million would bring in £260 billion, which could cover costs of both the NHS and social care spending over an entire year. But surely, charitable giving still thrives in providing aid to those most in need. That is probably not the case. Philanthropic particularism describes the trend wherein private charity tends to prioritize certain groups over others, particularly those that are viewed as more deserving of charity. According to The Atlantic, the largest single category of charitable giving in the United States goes not to caring for the poor, but for the sustenance of religious institutions at 32% of donations. Using very generous assumptions, Indiana University's Center for Philanthropy finds that only 1/3 of charitable giving actually goes to the poor. A great example of this is a trendy new donation strategy for billionaires called DAFs, or Donor Advised Funds. These are non-refundable donations that can be left sitting for years before ever being allocated a use. Unlike regular charities that are required to make a minimum payout every year in order to ensure that they are delivering on their charitable commitments, DAFs do not require such a minimum payout. They also come with even more tax benefits than regular direct donations, which, if you've been paying attention to the rest of the essay so far, that's the thing we need most is more tax benefits. They're an excellent way for the wealthy to offload and stockpile charitable donations whilst earning tax benefits at the same time. Since the DAFs are directed by the donor, these large amounts of money can sometimes be left sitting in a fund until the wealthy person's death, leading to a rushed and often poorly directed spending of the funds, usually on the likes of educational institutions related to the donor or the donor's offspring. Additionally, since there is no way to track individual donations from DAFs, they are often used as a source of dark money, money that is used to influence political outcomes where the source is not disclosed. DAFs are the fastest growing recipient of donations in the nonprofit sector, and it's not hard to see why, looking at the imbalance of benefits to the wealthy donor compared to the benefits of the eventual destination of the funds. Many donor-advised funds end up being used for bloated institutions, and in a way that isn't timely enough to be of any real use to those in need. Yeah, we're on the last one now. Lastly, philanthropic paternalism is when, instead of charity representing a purely spontaneous response by civil society or a community of equals responding to issues in the commons, there is, in practice, a disproportionate amount of power that rests in the hands of those with the greatest resources. We've already discussed prime examples of this earlier in the video, such as Bill Gates, the Sacklers, and the Koch brothers, who use their wealth to give to think tanks that help them pursue research that they have personal monetary stakes in, political advocates that create policy that benefits them and other like classes of people, or elite colleges or institutions that they then curry favor with for their offspring or use to whitewash their reputations in the eyes of the public. Because charities face so little regulation and oversight, they are breeding grounds for political mobilization from those who already possess the most power in our societies, channeling funds into areas that are already distended with money instead of to those that are actually in need. For example, next to churches, the second largest percentage of large donations from the wealthy tend to go to elite educational institutions. Ivy League college admissions tend to favor legacy and donor applications. This is open information, and it's not unusual for a person to attend an Ivy League school such as Harvard or Oxford and then pledge donations before their own children are due to apply, and so on. This creates a seemingly endless cycle of wealthy institutions attended by wealthy students who then become wealthy professionals in careers that are difficult to get into, mind you, without those Ivy League qualifications, who then have wealthy children for whom they donate large sums of money to their alma maters in order to get favor and preference for when their children are eventually old enough to apply. Famous cases allegedly associated with this phenomenon are Les Wexner, in charge of Victoria's Secret, Donald Trump, and Charles Kushner. Not all of these cases are descendants of the wealthy not able to attend these competitive schools on their own merit, but it does prompt the question about whether or not these institutions require such hefty donations when their earnings are already in the millions. It's not like it's cheap to attend Harvard or Oxford once you get in. Not only do donations like these go to institutions that are already seeing inflated profits instead of going to institutions that need the money, but they take away valuable opportunities from those without the finances to help secure a spot in the elite college, those spots being handed instead to those that are already profiting from generational wealth. Do you see what's happening here? All of this isn't to say that in a social welfare world, charity would be rendered obsolete. In fact, if the majority of the population was supported by the government, this would free up the voluntary sector's resources to respond in the ways that they do best, flexibly and directly to immediate needs. For example, charity and fundraising still play a hugely important role in disaster relief around the world. Governments struggle to react in timely and orderly fashions in events of crisis due to the bureaucracy and red tape involved in government spending. This is where charity, with its flexibility and less regulated spending, is able to step in more rapidly. Public social insurance would then be able to give every individual the security they need in order to fend off the four horsemen that affect us all in the modern age. With more robust investment into automatic stabilizers, policies that raise the income floor of average people such as food assistance and unemployment insurance, this means that in times of financial instability, such as recessions or pandemics, the average person is more able to contribute to the economy and society in meaningful ways because they have a stable baseline of security from which to operate, enabling businesses to stay afloat and in doing so helping the economy to recover. That leaves charity with the ability to enhance the lives of those in need and funnel money in case of emergencies rather than being burdened with attempting to provide a nation's worth of security to every individual. Operation Miracle is an international solidarity program that first began in 2004 by the collaboration of the governments of Cuba and Venezuela that aimed to provide free medical treatment to those affected by eye problems. Additionally, the program also provided medical equipment and infrastructure to those countries that it operated within. Through this program, 2019 saw over 4 million people in 34 countries receive life-changing, free eye care surgery. Mr. Beast, through his own charity, cured 1,000 people of blindness. Imagine how many people could be cured of blindness if instead of one wealthy man, an entire government rallied behind providing healthcare and welfare to its citizens. The response to MrBeast's video was actually what inspired me to write this essay in the first place. It seemed absurd to me that we get mad at TikTokers who film themselves giving money to a homeless person for clout, but that we applaud MrBeast for doing essentially the same thing on camera, but on a much larger scale. MrBeast tweeted about the experience, expressing what can only be described as confusion about how it is possible that these unaffordable surgeries are out of reach for those who need them most, and that the barrier of paid healthcare means the difference between the ability to work and provide for oneself and being barred from participating in regular society. More distressing were the number of comments I saw responding to MrBeast by encouraging him as a wealthy person to enact more philanthropy in the style shown in the video in order to enact social change, instead of getting angry about the lack of support the government provides to its own people. Worse, I saw people genuinely hopeful that billionaires would bail them out of the mess that them and their government cronies knowingly create. A lot of the positive responses to MrBeast's video and follow-up tweet praised him in the way of calling on him to actually get involved in politics, despite the fact that he addresses the need for healthcare in America as beneficial from a purely financial perspective rather than a humanitarian one. Does that not sound like what we already have? Do we want more billionaires in politics? Like, I don't think this video should make you sad or happy or even confused. I think it should make you angry. I think videos like this should stir fury inside of you when you realize that not only does the government in a wealthy country like America prioritize private corporations over the well-being of their own people enough to refuse to institute a system of national healthcare, but also that a YouTuber can make a name for himself and a profit on publicizing this injustice. To be clear, I don't want that anger to be directed at MrBeast. Okay, he's small fry. Nobody gives a shit. I think at best he was misguided, and at worst he is cynical. Be angry at the system that makes it so people who are permanently living with blindness could be not living that way if they only had access to a relatively affordable 10-minute life-changing surgery that separates them from autonomous living in a world that isn't built for the blind. Why distill? What about all of the other reversible, treatable, and manageable diseases, conditions, and disabilities that affect the lives of millions of people just because they cannot afford the access of therapies, medications, or treatments that would enable them to live autonomously and without limitations? Is Bill Gates' intellectual property ideology really worth the millions of lives that were lost to a lack of access to the COVID vaccine? Is the wealth and success of the Sacklers worth the lives that were lost or destroyed by the opioid crisis they tricked the world into, allegedly? MrBeast cured 1,000 people of their blindness by charitably providing them with a relatively affordable but inaccessible to many surgery. He changed and restored their lives. He made a difference. Imagine what could be achieved if our social safety nets, healthcare, and government fueled the same amount of proactiveness, motivation, and wealth into protecting and defending the lives of the people it is supposed to be committed to protecting and defending. That MrBeast video wouldn't have ever needed to be made. It wouldn't exist. On a more sort of personal talking point, if you want to continue donating to charity, go for it. You are one person, and I appreciate that, especially if you're not a large content creator. You don't necessarily have this massive platform to have an influence over. To charity, if you want to donate your time or your money to charity, please do. I'm not discouraging that by any means. But if your politics don't reflect the needs of the people that you're donating to, then you're only helping them to a certain extent. So just think about that, I suppose. The next time you cheer a billionaire for not being so bad because he donated some money to a cause that you care about or that you agree with, that's a nice thing to do. But he has a lot more power than you. He has a lot more power and influence and money than you. If his politics don't also represent the people that he supposedly cares about, he's not making as big a difference as he could. And he has the means to. But he is choosing not to. And that's something to think about. If you enjoyed this video, it's my very first one. Wow. Please be kind. But if you enjoyed this video, Share it, I suppose, do the things, like it, subscribe, let me know if you'd like to see more, if there are any topics you'd be interested in hearing about. I stream as well, usually weekly, on twitch.tv/SoFreely. You can see it on the screen, here, or there, I don't know. Come on in! I play video games, and if you want to discuss what we talked about in this video today, please come on in. Introduce yourself, say hi. I stream twice a week. Until the next time, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.